Alright, this is my Video Games in Russia slideshow presentation by me, Benjamin Peterson. I hope you're having a good evening, morning, whenever you're watching this, and we'll get right on with it. So, this is some history and some general information about video games in Russia. So, it actually has one of the largest gaming player bases in the world at 65.2 million players. This is modern information right here. It the video game industry is so huge. However, piracy is very big because we'll get into that later as to why, but it is very big in Russia. So personal computers and gaming systems started becoming popular in the 1980s, which include but aren't limited to the Atari 400 and the Atari 800, Commodore 64, and the ZX Spectrum 48, as well as the ZX Spectrum 128, and they were brought to the country from the United States, Europe, Japan, and China. So a lot of these are actual consoles, however, like from reputable companies. During this time, there's also a brand called Electronica that surfaced, creating consoles such as the Electronica 60, and most of those products were Nintendo clones. I have pictures of all of these products and stuff that I list on here, as well as some arcade machines. These were they're very, very rip off kind of stuff. The Electronica 60, that is, which I have shown later. It looks exactly like a Nintendo, almost dead on. So there were also Russian game developers during this time, one of which Alexei Pahitinov created Tetris. I probably butchered his name there, and I apologize. But there's also a '94 console called the Dendy that surfaced around that time, which was a hardware clone of the NES made in Taiwan. That thing looks dead on like a Nintendo Entertainment System. It's insane. I'm sorry, I said the Electronica was that. I apologize. That is a 1980s console that looks. It reminds me of if a PS3 was made in the 80s, if that makes sense. Same size and everything else. So the Dendy sold 6 million units in Russia. It was mainly big in only Russia. That's where its biggest like selling uh its biggest consumers were. Sorry, I apologize. I was looking for the word. It was made in Taiwan though. It is not Russian made. But yeah, so in 2010, Russian games were also pushed to be more patriotic, and non-Russian games were considered non-patriotic. We'll be getting into that soon. I have more information on that later. So Russia also had arcade games, which I could not find any pictures of these. I apologize; they're very difficult to find. But they tended not to have graphics, the early ones, but were emulated with physical objects, which my guess behind that is with it being at the time a communist country, they didn't have a lot of money to make free uh, arcade shops, and so the ones that were there were very cheap machines. But moving on, here are some of the computers and consoles I stated earlier. So we got the Commodore 64 here reminds me of a Macintosh a lot. A lot of this stuff looks like ripoffs. The Atari and the Atari 800 were very similar as well. I believe those are more computers than consoles. But they are because yeah, I think you just plug it into a monitor. However, they are those are huge in Russia. You got the very similar here ZX Spectrum 48 and the ZX Spectrum 128. And then here's the Electronica 60. So this is solely a gaming console. It's not a computer. It reminds me of a PlayStation. It doesn't have all the curvy lines of like the PS3 or the a lot of the features. However, it looks, I apologize, it looks very, very similar in terms of size and somewhat of the shape of that, when more so consoles around this time looked more like the Nintendo Entertainment System or something along these Atari computers up here, something along those lines. All right, moving on. Here is the Dendy. This is the junior version because this was a higher quality picture. However, you can see this is like a total Nintendo clone. You got the same exact looking controllers. The only difference looks like the branding on it and the fact that it doesn't have the cross pattern here. I don't remember which way it goes, but it has the little cross here, and this one just goes straight. Um, but yeah, you got this. You got the oops. You got the little cartridge, a little reset. Probably because this thing was very buggy. Power on and off, and I don't know why there's a middle mode there, but there is. Who knows? It's Russian. All right, moving on. So we have a what looks to be a Seawolf clone. That was my last assignment. Um, so you got the viewport a little different here on. Let me point you down here on the Seawolf. You had a screen here that people standing out in the lobby can see you playing and be like, "Oh yeah, I want to play that." This looks like the viewports are here. They're just two little windows, which my guess would be to save money, so you don't have to put all the fancy mirrors in to be able to see the screen here and through the viewport. It's mainly just through the viewport. Moving on. Oh, and one other difference I noticed is the button. The button is on the actual handle, which seems more that makes more sense to me to fire on the handle than to have to reach over here to fire, if that makes sense. So buttons here to fire. You can see the top, the submarines. It looks like a Seawolf exact ripoff. So this is just the one picture I have, but lots and lots of shooting based arcade machines from what I've seen. This one looks like it. I guess would be from this. You shoot the apple off the person's head or something along those lines. But a lot of target based games like that. Not for sure what this one is over here, but it looks like it might be one of those machines that are more almost like skee ball or something along those lines, where it's still something you would find in an arcade. Might not necessarily be considered an arcade game. I don't know if skee ball is, but it's got like the inset here. This doesn't look like it has a screen on it anywhere. It's just got some lights. So I'm not for sure what this one is, but we'll move on. So the culture behind it. So as previously stated in the history section, around 2010, the government started to strongly encourage video game companies to make patriotic games. What does this mean? It's not necessarily like, oh yeah, like fighting the capitalists from America, that kind of stuff. It's not. Um, it's more so that it's when I say make patriotic games, it's patriotic to play a Russian made game. So it was propaganda was spread that non-Russian games were considered anti-Russian. So a lot of these Russian games are based in Russia or Ukraine or somewhere in a similar area to Russia, right? Most of which are in Russia. An example of which is a game called Metro 2033. This is a 2010 first person shooter. This was pulled from Wikipedia, by the way. A survival horror video game developed by 4A Games and published by THQ. The story is based on Dmitry Glukovsky's novel of the same name, where survivors of a nuclear war have taken refuge in the metro tunnels of Moscow. So this is basically like a lot of here in America, a lot of movies are made after books. This is more so a video game being made after a book, which is actually interesting. I'm sure there's plenty of games made after a novel here in America, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. So I'm sure you know of a couple yourself, but that's interesting to me. Players control Artyom, a man who must save his home station from the dangers lurking within the metro. In the game, players encounter human and mutant enemies who can be killed with a variety of firearms. Players must also wear a gas mask to explore areas covered in fallout radiation, both underground and on the surface. This is not from Wiki. It might be on that Wikipedia page, but I remember getting this information from somewhere else. I think it was actually a different Wikipedia page on just video games in Russia. It's known to be a very buggy game and having very, very poor AI. I have a picture of it right here. It seems to be more I think this is a grainier picture. I feel like the game's probably a higher quality view than this. Um but you got those The graphics look amazing. The lighting reminds me, if you've ever played it, Need for Speed Rivals. This was released around the exact same time. Oops. For both the PlayStation 3 and 4. I don't know about if it's been re-released on the PlayStation 5, probably not, but that is one of my favorite games of all time. And it reminds me of the lighting in that game, where it's not necessarily ray tracing, but it's still beautiful looking lighting. They just do everything well with what the hardware capabilities are. Um, but looking at this, it looks. Besides, I've only played like an hour of Fallout 76 or whatever the number is, where it's the online one and not a story based. But um, it reminds me from the description of the game and some of the gameplay itself. It reminds me a lot of that, but more of a story based version. So moving on, we have the popularity, development, and players from the criteria, because a lot of these I could not touch points on, as there is no explanation as to why it isn't a huge game developing country where there isn't a large player base. It's in fact the opposite. So, as I previously stated, the video game industry in Russia is absolutely massive. Just in 2001, Russia recognized competitive video gaming as a sport and was the first country to do so. I don't have the exact date, but at least when I remember seeing competitive video games actually being played on a regular basis, I feel like was around the rise of Fortnite, where you had the cash cups and people competed, and there was like a finals or whatever it was. Um, I remember that vividly. I don't remember there being much other video game, at least here in America is what I'm talking about. Video game competitions or it being competitive. It was more so you just play for enjoyment or in your free time. So according to a poll by Moscow Times, 1 in 5 people in Russia play video games. This does include mobile, console, or PC. I'm sure most of us have a mobile game or two to, if you got 5 minutes while you're waiting or whatever. Um, that's common. However, with that being said, there is, I don't have this included, there is a research poll on the percents. I believe, I want to say it's 60% male and 40% female for console and PC gaming is the ratio, which is very surprisingly even. And there is also I want to say it's 55 and 45% for mobile, 55% male. It's very wide, it's very even, which is surprising to me. Um, so there's plenty of video game development in the country. This is just a theory I have, but with it being, this is not scientifically backed. There's no research I did on this, but with it being so cold in Russia, my favorite time to play games is when it's cold outside and I don't want to go outside. If that makes sense. So that's why I feel like it's so popular in Russia to play games. However, I would assume that there's other contributing factors. The country does have plenty of players to go around of all ages. Lots of people play video games there. Uh, I feel like for the same reason, yeah. So for the same reason I stated before, that's why there's so many players where it's so cold. A lot of people just play video games to pass time. That's just how it is there. But that is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.